Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty massive question. How does a country actually measure its success in the 21st century? I mean, we constantly hear big economic buzzwords thrown around on the news, right? But how do everyday things, like switching your cell phone plan or global work visas, actually tie back to the literal wealth of a nation? Well, today we are going to break down the macroeconomic scoreboard, and then we're going to look at the surprising everyday catalysts that drive those numbers through the roof.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, decoding GDP and GNP. Second, the telecom growth engine. Third, the power of MNP. And finally, number 4, the economics of mobility. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Decoding GDP and GNP.
Okay, so before we can talk about growing wealth, we've got to know how the score is actually kept by economists. Enter GDP, or Gross Domestic Product. This is basically the ultimate scoreboard for domestic production, and it acts as a direct measure of the strength of a local economy. When we calculate GDP, the focus is strictly on the total value of goods and services produced within a country's physical geographical borders. It honestly doesn't matter if that value was created by a local resident or a foreign national visiting for work. If it was produced inside the borders, boom, it counts toward the GDP.
Now, you've probably also heard of its counterpart, GNP, or Gross National Product. So, what's the difference? Well, it's actually pretty simple once you visualize it. While GDP measures what happens strictly on a local geographic scale, GNP operates on a totally international scale. GNP calculates the value produced by a country's citizens regardless of where they are in the world, but it excludes foreigners living inside the home country. The easiest way to think about it, GDP measures what happens inside the house, while GNP measures what the family earns everywhere else in the neighborhood.
If you want to calculate that GDP, economists usually use something called the expenditure approach. Think of it like a giant national household budget. It simply adds up C for all household consumption, I for business investments, and G for government spending. Then you just add X for your exports and subtract M for your imports. This equation is literally the engine block of the economy. But you have to wonder, what exactly is fueling these variables today?
Which brings us to Section 2, the telecom growth engine.
In our modern world, that traditional GDP equation is increasingly powered by the telecom sector. Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of digital mobility, the telecoms industry directly contributed a massive 6% to India's GDP in the 2020 to 2021 financial year. 6%. And that is for an economy that is racing toward a $1 trillion digital valuation. Plus, telecom foreign direct investment accounted for over 6% of India's total inflows, propping up millions of jobs. It is an absolute multiplier for economic development.
And hey, this isn't just an isolated case. Let's look at Indonesia, whose GDP hit $395 billion in the year 2000. When we look at the data, we see this fascinating statistical relationship. Get this. Every 1% increase in internet infrastructure directly boosts their GDP by over 0.15%. Meanwhile, traditional landline telephone infrastructure actually showed a negative correlation. That completely proves that high-speed modern digital connectivity is the true driver of modern economic output.
Let's keep moving. Section 3, the power of MNP.
Now, I want to zoom in from that massive national infrastructure to a specific regulatory lever that directly impacts your wallet, mobile number portability, or MNP. For this explainer, this is where it gets really interesting, because we really want to focus on the dynamic between GDP and MNP. It's such a perfect snapshot of how economies actually function. Think about it. GDP is the macro-level scoreboard, the massive trillions of dollars total value of a country. But MNP? That's a specific micro-level regulatory rule. And it is exactly this kind of micro-level friction removal that forces competition, lowers your costs, and ultimately powers that massive macro-level GDP score.
So what is it? Mobile number portability is just a regulatory rule that lets you switch mobile operators without changing your phone number. That's it. But by eliminating the hassle and the cost of getting a new number, MNP generates what economists call Type 1 benefits, which are direct savings for you, the person switching. But more importantly, it creates Type 2 benefits. Those are the competitive efficiencies and massive price drops that benefit the entire market, including the people who never even switch providers.
But here is the real kicker. Having the policy on the books isn't enough. It's all about the execution. International data across 30 countries shows that MNP only forces competition and drops retail prices by a solid 8 to 15% actually, if the porting process takes 5 days or less.
If regulators let that porting process drag on for 6 days or more, there is zero statistically significant drop in prices. Literally none. The sheer speed of mobility is what dictates the economic benefit.
And that brings us to Section 4, the economics of mobility.
We've just seen how removing digital friction creates wealth, so let's switch gears from moving data to moving people. How does physical mobility impact that giant GDP scoreboard? Well, under the General Agreement on Trade and Services, there is this concept called the Temporary Movement of Natural Persons, or TMNP. Often called Mode 4 Liberalization, TMNP is basically a revolving door for global talent. It temporarily shifts labor exactly to where it's needed most to provide specific services, and because it's purely temporary, it provides immense economic benefits without getting bogged down in the complex cultural debates that usually surround permanent migration.
Listen to this finding from researchers at the World Bank and Purdue University. It turns out that guarding human borders is actually way more economically damaging than taxing imported physical goods. Think about that for a second. We spend decades, literally decades, negotiating free trade for cars and computers, but restricting the temporary movement of human talent is actually dragging down global GDP far, far more than tariffs on goods ever could.
To put some hard numbers on that, $156 billion. If developed countries just relaxed their inward quotas for temporary labor by a measly 3% of their workforce, it would generate a staggering $156 billion in global welfare gains. That is a colossal boost to the global GDP scoreboard. And get this, it's actually 50% larger than the gains we'd get from wiping out all remaining global tariffs on physical goods.
And here is a twist that might surprise you. We always hear about needing highly skilled tech workers or doctors to drive the economy, right? Well, the data actually proves that moving unskilled, temporary labor is the more economically vital piece of the puzzle. While skilled labor definitely benefits specific, targeted service sectors, the benefits of unskilled labor ripple through much wider production chains. This generates even broader, foundational positive effects on real GDP for both the host and the home countries.
So as we've seen throughout this explainer today, whether we're talking about porting a cell phone number in under 5 days or letting temporary workers cross an international border, friction is the absolute enemy of GDP, period. Whether it's digital red tape or physical walls, mobility is the modern engine of wealth. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. If mobility so clearly drives our wealth and reduces our costs, why on earth do we continue to restrict it in such a connected world? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the scoreboard.